The dying flame.
The last warlock bled into the dirt. His name had been carved out of him long ago, first by the witchfinder's knives, then by time itself. Now, he was only a shadow hunched in the ruins of a dead coven sanctum, his fingers smearing crimson across the cracked altar. The air reeked of iron and burnt sage, of old magic and older pain. Outside, the torches of the hunting party flickered between the trees. They had tracked him for weeks, these righteous men with their iron talismans and their hungry blades. They wanted his death, they wanted his silence. The warlock laughed, a wet, broken sound. Let them come. His remaining hand pressed against the altar's sigil, the last mark of a forgotten language. The stone was cold, the gods were gone. But deep beneath the earth, something rotten and ravenous stirred at his touch. Blood was always the key. He dragged the dagger across his palm again, letting his life pool into the grooves of the spellwork. The runes drank greedily, blackening like scorched flesh. The ground trembled. The hunters' shouts turned to screams as the earth split beneath their feet. Something slithered up from the dark, not a spell, not a ghost, but a presence, vast and grinning. The warlock's veins turned black as the thing coiled inside him, whispering promises of vengeance, of power, of ruin. The first hunter burst through the door, his sword gleaming under the guttering torchlight. He froze at the sight of the warlock, no longer broken, no longer dying, but changed. The warlock rose. His shadow did not follow. When the screams finally faded, only the altar remained, its sigil glowing faintly in the pooling blood. And somewhere, in the hollows of the world, the last flame of magic sputtered, but it did not go out, not yet.
Ashes of the arcane.
Smoke curled from the ruins like the fingers of the dead. The warlock stood in the skeletal remains of the Grand Athenaeum, the last library of the old world. The witchfinder's pyres had burned for 3 days, turning centuries of spellcraft into drifting cinders. The air tasted of charred vellum and melted wax, of ink turned to poison in the heat. He walked through the wreckage, his boots crushing blackened bones. Librarians, scholars, fools who had thought knowledge might save them. Their skulls grinned up at him, teeth shattered by the zealots' hammers. The hunters had been thorough, but not thorough enough. Beneath a collapsed archway, something pulsed. A single book, bound in flesh that still bled when he touched it. The lexicon of forgotten tongues, the one tome even fire feared to consume. It whispered as he lifted it, the pages squirming against his fingers like living things. The words slithered into his mind, promising secrets, power, ruin. A shadow moved at the edge of the ruins. The warlock didn't turn. He didn't need to. He could smell the zealot's sweat, hear the creak of the bowstring as the arrow drew back. The lexicon sighed in his hands. The arrow never struck. When the screaming stopped, the warlock knelt beside the twitching corpse, dipping his fingers into the ruin of the zealot's throat. With blood and ash, he painted new runes across the book's cover. The pages shivered, drinking deep. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded. The hunt was regrouping. The warlock smiled. Let them come. The fire had not taken everything. Not yet.
The blood pact.
The cavern breathed. Wet stone pulsed like living flesh as the warlock descended into the earth. The lexicon clutched tight against his chest. Its whispers had led him here, to this forgotten place where the roots of the world coiled around something older than gods. The air thickened with the stench of rust and rotting meat, each step stirring bones that crunched like dry twigs beneath his boots. At the heart of the cavern, the altar waited, a slab of black stone veined with gold, its surface carved with sigils that moved when stared at too long. The warlock knew them. They were the same ones that now twisted beneath his skin, burning their way deeper with every spell cast, every life taken. The lexicon fell open to a page that hadn't existed before. The words slithered into his vision, promising power enough to scour the witchfinder's legions from the earth, for a price. He didn't hesitate. The dagger, still crusted with the zealot's blood, slid across his palm. His light spilled onto the altar, seeping into the grooves of ancient glyphs. The cavern shuddered. Shadows pulled thick as tar, swirling up from the cracks in the stone, from the hollows of long-dead things. They coiled around his legs, his chest, his throat cold as the grave, hungry as the void. Then it spoke, not in words, but in sensations, the crush of a ribcage, the burst of a heart, the last gasp of a drowned man. The offer was clear, power for a piece of what remained. The warlock bared his teeth. Let it take what it wanted. Let it carve him hollow if it must. The shadows surged inward, piercing flesh, rewriting it. His veins blackened. His bones groaned, reshaping themselves into something sharper, something meant for ruin. The pain was exquisite, a fire that burned without consuming, 1,000 needles stitching his soul into a new shape. When it was done, the cavern was silent. The altar was clean, and the warlock, he was more. The lexicon laughed in his hands as he climbed back toward the surface, toward the waiting hunt. Let them come. Now, he would enjoy it.
Hollow crowns.
The imperial city stank of rotten gold. The warlock walked its gilded streets, his form hidden beneath the tattered robes of a leper, his new power coiled tight beneath his skin. The nobles here wore their stolen magic like Uri amulets of crush, witchbone dangling from their throats, rings set with teeth pried from dead sorcerers' skulls. Their laughter rang hollow through marble halls, their feasts served on plates of enchanted silver that screamed when touched. He had come for the emperor's crown, not the visible one, the heavy circlet of platinum and sapphire that weighed down his brow. The other one, the invisible crown woven from stolen spales, the lattice of power that kept his rotting empire standing. It pulsed beneath the palace floors, a cancerous heart fed on the last dregs of sorted magic. The warlock slipped through the shadows like smoke. The guards at the inner sanctum died quietly, their throats filled with blackened roots that sprouted from his fingertips. Their blood watered the stones, hissing as it touched the warding runes carved into the floor. The vault door groaned at his touch, its enchantments unraveling like gutted thread. Inside, the air shimmered with trapped spirits, the remnants of those who had once wielded true power. Their whispers became screams as he approached the center pedestal, where the emperor's true crown floated, a writhing knot of light and shadow, its edges fraying like torn flesh. He reached for it, the crown bit back. Pain lanced up his arm, as the stolen magic within recognized him not as thief, but as rightful heir. The spirit shrieked as the crown's filaments burrowed into his flesh, stitching itself to his bones. Power flooded him, thick and cloying as blood, the weight of 100 murdered sorcerers pouring into his veins. Somewhere above, the emperor gasped as his false youth crumbled, his skin splitting like rotten fruit. The palace shook. The nobles' stolen charms shattered, embedding jagged fragments in their throats as they choked on dying magic. The warlock stepped over their twitching bodies as he ascended to the throne room. The emperor was already dead, his corpse slumped in a pool of his own liquefying organs. The warlock sat upon the throne. Outside, the city burned, and the crown, it sang.
The witchfinder's noose.
The pyres burned in perfect rows, each flame a spear of righteous fury stabbing at the dawn. The High Inquisitor Malric walked between them, his boots crushing the charred bones of the innocent and guilty alike. His armor, forged from the melted-down bells of ruined monasteries, clanked with every step, its surface etched with prayers that slithered like worms beneath the metal. He needed no evidence, no trials, only the scent of magic to condemn a soul. And now, with the imperial city reduced to ashes by the warlock's hand, the hunt had become holy war. His scouts had returned with blackened tongues, their eyes gouged out by unseen hands. But they had spoken enough before dying. The warlock was coming. Malric smiled. Let him. The trap was set. 500 zealots knelt in the blood-soaked mud of the execution square, their throats cut just enough to bleed, but not enough to die. A living circle of suffering, their poured life forming the lines of a grand warding sigil. At its centre hung an iron noose, forged from the nails of 100 burned witches. It swung gently in the wind, waiting. The warlock came at dusk, not with thunder or shadow, but as a beggar might, limping, head bowed, his form wrapped in rags that dripped with the rain. The zealots tensed, their hands shaking on their blades. Malric stood motionless, his gaunted fingers curling around the hilt of his flensing knife. The warlock stopped at the edge of the blood circle. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the noose twitched. The warlock's head snapped up as the iron loop lunged like a striking serpent, its jaws clamping around his throat. The zealots roared, driving their knives into their own palms to feed the ward. The sigil ignited, chains of crimson light erupting from the ground to coil around the warlock's limbs, burning through cloth and flesh alike. Malric stepped forward, his knife gleaming. The warlock met his gaze and laughed, a sound that cracked the earth beneath them. The noose shattered. The blood circle exploded, droplets hanging frozen in the air before reversing course, punching through armor, through flesh, through bone. Zealots collapsed, their bodies sieves, their screams cut short as their own blood drowned them. Malric barely had time to raise his knife before the warlock was upon him. The flensing blade found its mark, carving deep into the warlock's side, but the wound sealed instantly, flesh knitting itself back together with a sound like tearing parchment. The last thing Malric saw was the warlock's hand closing over his face, then darkness. When the crows came at dawn, they found the square littered with corpses, their faces frozen in silent screams. And swinging gently from the gallows, Malric's hollowed-out armor clanked in the wind, his skin neatly folded inside. The noose, now rusted with blood, waited for the next neck, but the warlock, he was already gone.
Bone-stitched shadows.
The marsh exhaled the dead, mist curled from black waters as the warlock waded through the fen, his boots sinking into mud thick with the bones of forgotten battles. This was a place between life and death, where the veil hung in tatters, where things that should have stayed buried walked again, and she was waiting. The revenant stood atop a mound of broken shields, her form stitched together from memories and marrow. The warlock recognized the curve of her jaw, the way her fingers had once woven spells instead of shadow. Lysara, his first apprentice. His first betrayal. She had been dead 7 years. Now, she smiled with lips of knotted sinew. "You left me to burn," she whispered, her voice the sound of wind through hollow bones. The warlock said nothing. He had no words for ghosts. Lysara moved, her body unraveling into a swarm of skeletal hands that scuttled across the marsh like spiders. They surged toward him, fingers snapping like twigs, reaching to pull him apart. The first wave hit bone talons raking his chest, drawing blood that sizzled where it struck the water. He could have killed her, again. Instead, he let her come. The hands dragged him down, the marsh swallowing him whole. Water filled his lungs, thick with the taste of decay. Memories flashed Lysara screaming as the pyre took her, the witchfinder laughing, the way her eyes had begged him for help he never gave. Blackness, then light. The warlock woke on his knees, coughing up brackish water and blood. Lysara loomed over him, her form solid now, her hollow chest pressed against his back, her teeth at his ear. "You owe me," she breathed. He did. With a snarl, the warlock drove his fist into the mud. The marsh shrieked as his power tore through it, ripping open the veil wider. Ghosts erupted from the water soldiers, witches, innocents, all the dead the witchfinder had slaughtered. They turned their hollow eyes toward Lysara. "Take them," the warlock offered without words. "Take your vengeance." Lysara's smile split her face. She fell upon the spirits like a starving wolf, her form swelling as she consumed them, stitching their essence into her own. The warlock watched as she grew, as she changed, her body twisting into something vast and terrible. When it was done, she was no longer just Lysara. She was an army, and the Witchfinder's stronghold lay just beyond the horizon. The warlock rose, water sloughing from his robes. Lysara tilted her head, her new form gleaming in the moonlight. "Now we hunt," she said, and the dead followed.
The god that crawls.
The earth trembled with something older than hunger. Deep beneath the ruins of the Witchfinder's stronghold where Aurora's bone army still picked flesh from blackened stones, the ground had begun to breathe. Cracks spread like veins through the scorched earth, exhaling air that reeked of wet stone and rotting divinity. The warlock knelt, pressing his palm to the soil. The heartbeat that answered shook his bones. Lysara's shadow loomed over him, her stitch-tight form vibrating with stolen spirits. "You woke it," she whispered, her voice the rasp of 1,000 dead throats. He had. The blood pact demanded it. The first tendril emerged at dusk, a slick, pulsing thing thicker than an oak, its surface studded with teeth that ground against each other like tectonic plates. It speared upward, impaling one of Lysara's revenants, dissolving the spirit into smoke before it could scream. The warlock's stolen crown grew hot against his brow, its whispers rising to a shriek. Not a god, not any more. Just hunger wearing dead divinity like a skin. The ground ruptured. Flesh-colored roots erupted, each one birthing mouths that howled in tongues that burned the air. A village vanished into a sudden sinkhole, timber and bodies crushed between grinding stone teeth. Rivers reversed course, flowing black as the thing beneath drank them dry. Lysara bared her own needle teeth. "You made this, fix it." The warlock unsheathed the knife he had carried since the dying flame, the one still crusted with his own blood from the first ritual. The blade pulsed in time with the crawling horror beneath them. Some bargains could not be unmade, only fed. He drove the knife into the earth. The ground screamed. The roots recoiled, spasming as his blood thick with stolen magic, and the weight of his sin seeped downward. For a heartbeat, the hunger stilled. Then the earth swallowed the knife. And the hunger changed. It knew his name now. Lysara's hollow eyes met his. The message was clear. They had bought a reprieve, not a victory. And somewhere in the dark, the god that was no longer a god remembered how to crawl.
The hollowing.
The first piece of the warlock to disappear was his reflection. He noticed it in a rain barrel outside the ruins of a burned-out chapel where his face should have been. Only darkness stared back. Not shadow, not illusion, but an absence, as if something had reached inside him and scooped out what made him whole. The blood pact was collecting its debt. His skin had begun to crack like parched earth, fissures spreading from the old wound where Malric's flensing knife had bitten deepest. No blood seeped from the splits, only a fine black dust that stank of burnt hair and dead stars. When he pressed a finger to the cracks, he felt nothing. No pain, no warmth. Just the terrible, gnawing hollowness where flesh should be. Lysara watched from the shadows, her bone-stitched form twitching with stolen spirits. She said nothing, but her hollow eyes spoke volumes. "You are unraveling." The warlock clenched his fist, and the cracks widened up his arm. Magic still answered his call, but each spell cost him now. Every incantation carved another piece out of him, leaving behind only the echo of what had been. He could feel the thing beneath the earth, the god that was not a god, whispering through those gaps, its voice slithering into the spaces where his soul used to be. That night, by a fire that gave no warmth, he dreamed of teeth, not the god's teeth, his own. He woke choking on black dust, his mouth full of crumbling enamel. When he spat, his teeth littered the ground like broken pearls. Lysara crouched beside him, her skeletal fingers hovering over the fragments. "It's eating you," she murmured. The warlock touched his tongue to the raw, empty gums. The taste of blood was gone. All he tasted was nothing. He reached for his power, the crown's stolen magic, the lexicon's whispers, the blood pact seething dark, and felt it slither through his grasp like smoke. Lysara's hand closed around his wrist. Her fingers sank into the cracks, probing the hollowness beneath. "You'll die," she said. The warlock looked past her, to the horizon where the earth had begun to bulge, as if something vast and hungry pressed up from below. "No," he said, his voice the rasp of wind through dead leaves. "I'll become something else," and the cracks spread deeper.
The Shattered Covenant.
Lysara's stitches were coming undone. The warlock saw it in the way her bone army hesitated at the edge of the blighted forest, their hollow eyes fixed not on the enemy ahead, but on him. The cracks spreading across his flesh pulsed with borrowed power, each throb sending tremors through the revenant's borrowed forms. They no longer recognized their master, only the hunger gnawing at his core. A whisper slithered between them half-formed words, the last remnants of Lysara's stolen voice. You promised, he had, vengeance, freedom, a world purged of the Witchfinder's kind. But promises meant nothing to the void growing inside him. The blood pack's price was coming due, and the warlock could feel its collector stirring beneath the earth, its tendrils tasting the air for his dwindling soul. The first revenant turned on him at dusk. One of Lysara's earliest creations, a spirit stitched into the corpse of a slain zealot, lunged without warning, rusted blade flashing. The steel bit deep into the warlock's forearm, but no blood welled, only dust, black, lifeless dust. The revenant screamed as the cracks in the warlock's flesh reached for it, tendrils of hungry darkness, latching onto its stolen form. The spirit unraveled, its essence sucked into the growing void beneath the warlock's skin. Lysara's shriek of fury shook the trees, her bone-stitched body quivering as her army hesitated between loyalty and survival. The choice was made for them. The ground between warlock and revenants erupted, not with roots or teeth, but with lighter searing, silvered radiance that sent the dead scrambling back. Through the glare stepped the last person the warlock expected to see alive, the Witchfinder's apprentice. Clad in armor forged from melted down witch bells, her eyes burned with a fervor that bordered on madness. In her hands gleamed the one weapon that could still make the warlock's hollow heart clench a blade of cold iron, its edge etched with the true name of the thing beneath the earth, the name he had given it in the blood pact. Lysara's revenants turned as one, their hollow gazes locking onto this new threat. But the warlock stood frozen, the cracks in his flesh pulsing in time with the distant, subterranean heartbeat of the god that was not a god. The apprentice smiled, her teeth red with bitten-through lips. "You should have died when you had the chance," she whispered. Then she spoke the name, and the world screamed.
Thorns of the Forgotten.
The forest woke in blood. Where the Witchfinder's apprentice had spoken the god's name, the earth split like rotten fruit. Ancient trees groaned as their roots tore free of the soil, writhing like serpents. Thorns burst from bark, each one longer than a man's arm, glistening with something darker than sap. The forest remembered its old hungers, and it was starving. The warlock stumbled back as the first vine lashed toward him, its thorns scraping across the hollowed-out cracks of his chest. No blood welled, only dust, black and lifeless. But the forest didn't want his blood. It wanted what was left of his magic. Lysara's revenants shrieked as thorns punched through their stitch-tight forms, roots coiling around bone and spirit alike. The forest drank deep, its canopy shuddering with perverse pleasure as it feasted on stolen souls. The apprentice was screaming too, her iron blade buried in the earth, her hands clamped over her ears as the trees whispered secrets meant to flame irons. The warlock alone stood silent, the cracks in his flesh pulsed, not with pain, but recognition. This place knew him. These were no ordinary trees. They were the remains of the first coven, the ones who had bargained with the earth long before his blood pact. Their roots had cradled the god that was not a god in its slumber. Their branches had borne fruit of living flesh. And now, awakened by the god's true name, they reached for him not to consume, but to claim. A thorned vine wrapped around his wrist, its barbs sinking into the hollow spaces between his bones. Memories flooded him, not his own, but the forest's, 1,000 rituals, 1,000 sacrifices. The taste of magic thick on the tongue, the way it had felt before the world forgot. The warlock exhaled, and the forest exhaled with him. The apprentice's screams cut off abruptly as a root speared through her chest, lifting her thrashing body into the canopy. Her blood rained down, watering the roots. Lysara was the last to fall. Her bone-stitched form unravelled as thorns pierced her core, her hollow eyes locking with the warlock's as the forest took her apart. "You were supposed to save us," her gaze accused. The warlock watched as the vines dragged her under. Then he turned, stepping deeper into the trees. The thorns parted for him. They remembered their king.
The Inquisitor's pyre.
The Witchfinder's stronghold burned, but not with common fire. Flames of liquid silver crawled up the blackened spires, their heatless light casting no shadows, only revealing what should not be seen. The stones themselves screamed as they cracked, their mortar weeping thick, dark blood. The warlock walked through the inferno untouched, the hollows of his body drinking the flames like water. At the heart of the ruin, the High Inquisitor waited. Malric had not died in the square, not truly. The warlock's vengeance had been too clean, too quick. The zealots had gathered their master's remains, stitching him back together with threads of holy writ and hatred. Now he stood more relic than man, his body a patchwork of charred skin and rusted armor, his mouth sewn shut with silver wire, his eyes still burned with faith. The warlock's cracked lips twitched. Let him burn with it. Malric struck first. His flensing knife, the same one that had carved the warlock's flesh months before, flashed out, its edge singing with forbidden psalms. The blade found its mark, shearing through the warlock's ribs, but no blood spilled. Only dust, black and endless, pouring from the wound like smoke from a dying pyre. The warlock did not flinch. He exhaled, and the dust became serpents, coiling around Malric's limbs, biting deep with fangs of hollow bone. The Inquisitor staggered, his sutured skin splitting, as the serpents burrowed inward, seeking the rock beneath his righteousness. The stronghold shuddered. From the cracks in the floor, from the spaces between stones, the god that was not a god whispered its hunger. The silver flames dimmed, their light swallowed by something older than fire. Malric's stitches burst, his body unravelled, not into flesh, but into words, the holy verses that had held him together spilling from his seams like entrails. The warlock caught one, crushing it between his fingers, the parchment disintegrated to ash. A sound like breaking chains filled the air as the last of Malric's bindings snapped. His body collapsed, a puppet with its strings cut, his sewn-shut mouth finally slack. The warlock knelt beside the ruin of his oldest enemy. With a touch, he set the corpse alight not with silver flames, but with the black fire of the hollow places. Malric burned in silence, and from the ashes something stirred. Not a man, not a ghost, but an ending. The warlock turned his face toward the final battlefield. The last spell awaited.
The last spell.
The earth remembered pain. Where the warlock knelt, the ground had turned to glass, a vast, jagged crater left by the Inquisitor's pyre. The air snarled of lightning and old bones, of endings to long postponed. Around him, the world held its breath. The god that was not a god stirred beneath his feet, its hunger a second heartbeat thrumming through the hollows of his flesh. It was time. From the cracks in his body, the warlock began to pull the remnants of all he had consumed, the lexicon's whispers, the crown's stolen power, Lysara's dying scream, the forest's ancient thirst. They came unwillingly, clinging to his bones like drowning men to wreckage. Black smoke poured from his wounds, coalescing into runes that burned themselves into the glass beneath him. The spell took shape, not a banishment, unmaking. The first sacrifice was his own flesh. The cracks widened, splitting him open like overripe fruit, his essence spilling into the spellwork. The pain was beyond agony, it was revelation. He saw the threads that bound the world, the delicate stitches holding reality together. And he saw the gnawing absence at the center of it all, the void where the old gods had once been. The second sacrifice was his magic. The last embers of his power tore free, a final conflagration that lit the crater with corpse light. The runes blazed, their fire licking at the edges of existence itself. The ground trembled as the god that was not a god roared in recognition not of defiance, but of invitation. The warlock smiled with teeth he no longer had. The third sacrifice would be the world, or what was left of it. He raised his hands, and the spell sank.
Where gods fear to tread.
The sky tore like rotten parchment. What emerged was not a god, not any more just hunger given form, a vast and writhing absence that made the eyes bleed to behold. The earth split beneath it, not in protest, but in worship, centuries of buried bones rising like offerings to greet their devourer. The warlock stood at the epicenter, his body barely more than a husk now, the cracks in his flesh glowing with the last embers of his spell. The thing that had been a god saw him, and recognized its kin. A tendril of screaming darkness lashed down, wrapping around the warlock's torso. Where it touched, his remaining flesh dissolved, not into blood, but into the same hungry void. The pain was beyond agony, it was transformation. He could feel himself unraveling, his essence becoming part of the great knowing nothing that had waited so long beneath the world. This was the blood pack's final price. Not just his life, his self. The warlock laughed with a mouth that no longer existed and reached inside the void. His fingers, what remained of them, closed around the core of the god that was not a god. Not its heart, for it had none, but the first wound, the original sin that had birthed it when the old gods died. The wound pulsed in his grip, a terrible, lonely rhythm. For a moment, the world held its breath, then the warlock pulled. The god screamed, the sky screamed with it. And in the space between heartbeats, between existence and oblivion, the warlock made his final choice, not to banish, not to destroy, but to remember. The void convulsed, and began, impossibly, to bleed.
A world without magic.
The silence was the first thing they noticed. No whispers from the wind, no hum of power beneath the earth. The great absence settled over the world like ash for a fire, smothering the last gasps of the arcane. The god that was not a god had bled out across the sky, its dark essence dissipating into nothingness and taking the remnants of magic with it. The warlock was gone. Not dead, not alive, just gone, his final axe seared into the scorched earth where he had stood. The crater where the last spell had been cast glistened like obsidian, its surface smooth and unyielding, reflecting nothing. No one dared approach it. Those who tried found their footsteps faltering, their minds recoiling from the absolute nothing that radiated from that place. In the cities, the witch-finders' remaining zealots wandered like ghosts, their holy blades suddenly just steel, their wards just ink on parchment. The nobles who had fed on stolen magic clutched at their amulets, now lifeless stones, and wept as their false youth abandoned them. The cursed forest stood still, their thorns brittle, their hunger finally sated. And the people, those who had survived, touched their children's faces and wondered at the quiet. No more whispers in the dark. No more monsters in the woods. No more gods beneath their feet. Only the wind remembered, and even that memory was fading. Somewhere, in the space between what was and what might have been, something that had once been a warlock opened eyes that were no longer eyes and saw the shape of the world he had unmade. It was quiet. It was ordinary. It was, at last, over. And in that final, fleeting moment before dissolution, he thought he heard a whisper not from the lexicon, not from the crown, but from a voice long forgotten. Rest. Then even that was gone, and the world, at last, was free.
The nameless grave.
Years passed like shadows. The black crater where the last spell had been cast grew cold, its glassy surface gathering dust. Seasons turned, and the earth no longer breathing, no longer dreaming slowly crept over the wound. Grass sprouted, pale and thin, its roots hesitant in the once-skirted soil. Children played at the crater's edge now, daring each other to step closer to the spot where their grandparents swore a great evil had died. They found nothing but smooth stone and the occasional glint of something metallic, a shard of a melted blade, a twisted bit of armor, all rendered mundane by time. No one remembered his name. Not the scholars who picked through the ruins of the imperial city, now just another relic of a forgotten age. Not the farmers who tilled fields where the bone army had marched. Not even the old woman who sometimes stood at the crater's edge, her hands clutching a tattered book with pages that had once whispered secrets, but now lay silent. The wind remembered, though, on certain nights, when the moon hung low and the air smelled of coming rain, it would stir the grass in patterns too precise to be chance. It would trace the outline of a man who was not there, his arms raised as if still holding back the dark. And then, just as quickly, the moment would pass. The children would laugh and run home, the old woman would sigh and turn away. And the grass would keep growing, inch by inch, over the nameless grave. Somewhere, in the quiet between breaths, in the space between the world as it was and the world as it had become, something that was no longer a warlock, but had not quite become nothing let go at last, and the wind, finally, forgot.